Hi, this is Pat Johnson, your sociology instructor. In this mini lecture, we're going to talk about Karl Marx. Any discussion of social stratification would be lacking without looking at Marx's theory and what he brought to understanding of social stratification in society. Marx was born into what would be now part of Germany, but he spent most of his life in England, specifically in London, looking at the Industrial Revolution and what it did to society. Karl Marx is considered a philosopher, a social scientist, a historian, and a revolutionary. One of the primary concepts that Marx brought to the table was the concept of capitalism at the height of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was where energy was harnessed so that power could be generated that was other than, let's say, human power or animal power. So the steam engine, the water wheel, and later petroleum, energy sources, be it through coal, gasoline, diesel, all of these brought the Industrial Revolution to create exorbitant amounts of wealth in a group that Marx dubbed the capitalists. So the capitalist, or the bourgeoisie, owned the means of production. In other words, they owned the factories. They were the wealthy. They did not labor. They bought labor from the proletariat. So the capitalists are a small segment of society, but very, very wealthy, especially during the Industrial Revolution. They lived luxurious lifestyles and they owned the means of production. The laborers were called the proletariat. So proletarians were people who sold their labor for wages. This was long before there were labor laws. This was long before there was mandatory education. This was before there was OSHA. So the proletariat lived very miserable lives. They lived in slums. The housing conditions were poor. The working conditions were poor. Unions were not allowed. The work conditions were very dangerous, and it was pretty much a miserable life for the proletariat during Marx's time with the Industrial Revolution going on. Marx wanted a revolution. He wanted a revolution of the proletariat against the capitalists or the bourgeoisie. He wanted the proletariat to band together and to have a bloody revolution where the proletariat would overthrow the capitalists. He said the proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. What he wanted, and what he's most famous for, is communism. He wanted a communist society. And communism is a little bit different from what we might think it is. In communism, the people together own the means of production. There is no private property. So all private property is abolished, and all the means of production are not in the hands of capitalists, but of the workers as a unit. Now, are there any problems with that? Well, Marx's form of communism never existed. Even in China, even in the Soviet Union, there was no pure communism. There were always people at the top who had power over the working group at the bottom. I am blessed to know two people who lived through communism, one in China and one in the Soviet Union. My social psychology instructor at East Carolina University, Dr. Rosina Jha, grew up in China during the Cultural Revolution, and her parents fled. And she said it was a horrible system. There was great poverty, there was great starvation, as did my neighbor who grew up in the Soviet Union, who also fled. One of the things that he said was that nobody wanted to work because you weren't working for anything for yourself. If you couldn't have private property, then what would be the point of working really hard just to make the society wealthier? Actually, there were great shortages. There was a lot of waste. There was hunger. There was not very good living conditions during the Soviet Union for the typical worker in society. So while Marx wanted something that seemed on the surface good, that those who worked hard in society, the proletarians, should gain some of the wealth, it actually didn't work well, and ultimately the proletarians became the working class. They gained some rights, they were able to unionize, they were able to create some wealth, to own some of the means of production through stock ownership, and communism, at least in Marx's form, never did exist. And so we can debate about whether communism is a good thing or a bad thing. My personal opinion, not the best type of society to have. I would rather work for myself and what I get to own.